All right, a gute Woche, a fröhliche Woche. Want to share a few stories tonight. We're coming from a period that we celebrate miracles and wonders, and there's a difference between the way the Jewish people describe the holiday of Passover to the way that God describes the holiday of Passover. We call this holiday Passover because God passed over the homes of the Jewish people and rescued them. We talk about the Hebrew word for Passover also means love. God's love for us and how God rescued us despite um, despite the various merits that we did or didn't have. God rescued us and saved us in time of the story of Passover. But God has different name for the holiday of Passover. God calls the holiday of matzahs, the holiday of matzah, because God doesn't describe the holiday based upon His greatness. Instead, God describes the holiday based upon our greatness. That we left Egypt and we went out in the desert and we went so quickly without time for the dough to rise. So that's why God describes the holiday as a holiday of matzahs, bringing out the greatness of the Jewish people. So tonight, as we are coming from Shabbos and the week of celebrating Passover, a few different stories I wanted to share, some highlighting the greatness of the Jewish people, and some highlighting the greatness of Hashem's miracles for us. I want to begin with a story that highlights the greatness of the Jewish people. L'chaim, L'chaim. I heard the story from my brother-in-law, Rabbi Shmuel Hecht, was just visiting us and had been in El Paso, Texas for Passover. And he shared the story that he heard from a visiting Chabad rabbi, Rabbi Mendy Baron, who lives in Maryland. He shared the story about one of the events that happened this year on Passover. He said that in his Chabad center, they routinely ask everyone who visits for their ID and for a reference. Apparently, they had some difficult visitors in the past. So every person who comes to their Chabad center is asked for ID and for a reference. So the gentleman joins them. Presents his ID, but he says, "I don't have a reference. If you don't want to accept me, I understand, but I don't have any references." So they look at the ID, and this guy's name is like his the way he's referred to is more the way he looks, and his the way he's referred to is more like John Doe, but his ID says that he's more like a very Jewish name, like let's say Yankel Katzenelbogen, like totally very Jewish, thick Yiddish name, Yank Katzenelbogen, but he presents as and looks as John Doe. So they make some phone calls. This man's from Lakewood. And they discovered this man had a very difficult life. His father died when he was very young. And he had gotten married and divorced, and he had a lot of disappointments, including his relationships. And because of this, he had somewhat rejected all of his upbringing, and he was now on his own journey. But he wanted to come to the Passover Seder, and with their phone calls, they were able to see that this guy he's okay, and he can come to the Seder. He comes to the Seder, and after everyone leaves, the man asks the Chabad rabbi, "Please tell me your first name." He says, "My name is Mendel." He said, "Okay, Mendel, would you mind if I ask you the four questions, like a child asks his father the four questions?" So Rabbi Baron says, "Certainly, go ahead." So he begins, and he says the four questions, not like a John Doe would say the four questions, but the way Yankel Katzenellenbogen would say them. Tat is Mendel, my dear sweet father Mendel, ich will bei dir fragen vier Kashes. I want to ask you four questions. When he finishes that sentence, he cannot speak anymore, and he breaks down crying. And it took him a while to come to himself. And when he continues in the same traditional Yiddish presentation, the four questions. Was sagst nach dem Pest von all ganz Jahr? Die erste Kasche is, and he tells he tells Mendel the four questions with such emotion and such. I mean, Barron said it was probably this man had never had a chance to ask his father the four questions in his life. And there was a lot of energy, a lot of emotion that he presented in the four questions. We all have our own journeys, we all come from different places, but eventually, no matter what happened in the past, we all come home. Another story, more in the realm of the Chagamatzis, just heard now, there was a Rebbe in Lustig, who just passed away, was a great grandmother and a Holocaust survivor. She was in Mauthausen and in Bergen-Belsen, and I believe it was in Mauthausen, where they separate the men and the women. She just told this story to her family. She didn't really want to speak about the Holocaust, but at the end of her life, she shared the following story. She says they had separated the men and the women with barbed wire. And one day, this man screams from the other end, other side of the barbed wire. He screams, "Heint bei Nacht is Pesach. Tonight is Passover." So, what can you do with that? What are they supposed to do with Passover? How are they supposed to celebrate Passover? What could they possibly do? However, that night, the Nazis, for the first time in a week, gave the Jews bread. And she said that she refused the bread. She refused the bread not just for one day, she refused the bread for the entire Passover. And she said, and here she is. She said the story at the end of her life. She says, here she is. She's a great grandmother and celebrating the circumcision of her great grandson. And all those who sought to destroy us are all long gone. 8 days she need bread in the concentration camp. I don't know how that's possible, but I do know that it happens. In fact, my own great grandfather was arrested by the KGB before Passover, and he was released the day after Passover. And he too also somehow survived without eating bread the entire Passover. I don't know what else they gave them. I don't know how he possibly survived, but this is the miracle of the Jewish people. I'm only here today because of that miracle. L'chaim, l'chaim v'rach. Continuing on with miracles more in the realm of Chag Pesach, miracles that express God's greatness, God's miracles. I have to share this with you. I was coming home today from shul, and I met the renowned chassid Rabbi Yossel Mashkin, and I had some stories that I had heard in his name, and I wanted to hear them firsthand, and I was not disappointed. Thank you very much for sharing these stories. Story number one. Rabbi Yossel Mashkin's mother, she lived and be well. When Yossel was born, in the month of Cheshvan, she took ill, and 2 months later, in the month of Shvat, her father-in-law was by the Rebbe for Shvat, for the celebration of the Rebbe's leadership on the 10th of Shvat, and Rabbi Machkin took the opportunity to ask the Rebbe for a blessing for his daughter-in-law who had become so ill. And the Rebbe gave a blessing. But about 20 minutes later, the Rebbe was about to begin the annual discourse, annual Hasidic discourse, where he delves into his father's father-in-law's 20-paragraph discourse that he had delivered right before his passing. Very serious, intense time. Just to open our ears a little bit to the kind of intensity of that moment. Before the Rebbe recites a discourse, not only is a song recited, but the Rebbe traditionally would also wrap his hand in a handkerchief as his predecessors did. And Hasidim say, I don't know what the source of this is, but this is what Hasidim say, that the reason why the Rebbe wraps his hand in a handkerchief is because he wants to hold on to the world. Because the Hasidic discourse brings a person to a state of rapture and attachment to Hashem, like we read today in the Torah portion about, as Orach Chaim explains, that Nadav and Avihu, their souls left their bodies because of their intense yearning to be close to Hashem. As the Torah says, "Bekarvasam Hashem vayamusu," they came close to God and they died. So in a similar way, a tzaddik, before delivering a discourse of this kind, wraps his hand in a handkerchief. That's what Hasidim say. So the Rebbe was about to deliver the discourse, and his hand is wrapped, but Rabbi Parrott had just gotten word that Yossel Mashkin's mother is in her last moments. So he goes over to the Rebbe and he puts his cup out, and the Rebbe turned to another chassid there, an elderly chassid named Rabbi Zalman Duchman, and the Rebbe said, "Sie nicht schuldig, as hat in mir nicht keine Emunah." Rebbe pulled down Peretz's hat all the way to his nose, and Rebbe said, "It's not her fault that you have no faith in me. It's not her fault." And then Rebbe continued, "Sie wird leben und leben und leben." She will live and live and live. And thank God, she is alive till today, and may she live and live and live till Bias HaMashiach. L'chaim, l'chaim v'rach. Another story he shared was about, this is a joint of both Chag HaMatzos and Chag HaPesach story. Rabbi Mashkin's father-in-law was Rabbi David Edelman from Springfield, Massachusetts, a very, very close friend of my grandfather, Rabbi Folgeman. And one of his major supporters was a man named Jeffrey Kimball. And Jeffrey would also participate in the Machane Yisrael Development Fund. And as such, he would be granted a special audience with the Rebbe that wasn't granted to everyone. And at a time when private audiences weren't granted, he and a few others were granted this private audience. So he comes to the Rebbe, and he asked Rebbe for a blessing for many people. But he realized that he forgot to ask a blessing for himself. So he went to his rabbi's son-in-law, Rabbi Yossel Mashkin. He said, "Listen, you're going into the Rebbe also." He was also participating in this audience. He also participated in the Machane Yisrael Development Fund. And he said, "I also want a blessing for myself. Maybe when you go in the Rebbe, would you mind asking the Rebbe for a bracha for me?" He says, "Sure." He goes into the Rebbe, and when he comes to the Rebbe, he tells the Rebbe he wants a bracha for Jeffrey Kimball, and the Rebbe asks, "What's his Jewish name?" And he knew. Tells the Rebbe his Jewish name, Yehuda something. And so then the Rebbe said, "But what's his wife's name?" Her English name is Holly. So Rabbi Machka didn't know her Jewish name. He says, "Holly, I don't know her Jewish name." So the Rebbe paused for a moment, and then the Rebbe said her name and her mother's name. And then the Rebbe said, "She'll be okay. She'll be fine. And she's blessed." And the Rebbe also said, "And I already included her husband in the blessing. He's already blessed. I gave him my blessing." In other words, although Jeffrey was concerned he wasn't included, I said, "I already gave my blessing, and she is blessed, and she'll be okay, and she'll be healthy, and she'll be fine." The Rebbe expressed this many times. Now, many years later, Jeffrey Kimball was concerned. His wife was going through a medical procedure and had to do various tests. And he was very concerned about her. And he asked, among other things, Jewish Educational Media if they could provide for him all the different visits that he had with the Rebbe and different encounters. So Jewish Educational Media, asked Yossel Machkin if he'd be willing to share a transcript of his audience with the Rebbe. He said, "Sure." The date they gave him the transcript was the same day that a test was going to be reviewed. They're going to get the results of a certain test, and when Jeffrey read this transcript, how the Rebbe says about his wife, she'll live, and she'll be okay, and nothing to worry about. He told his wife, "I don't know what they're going to tell you, but I could tell you that you'll live, and you'll be okay. We got this message from the Rebbe today. It's a message for you today. She'll live and be okay." And sure enough, the doctors told her, "You're okay. Don't come back for another test for 30 years. As the doctor said. Um, I also wanted to share a group of stories that were shared by Rabbi Chaim Baruch Halberstam, who had the great merit of working in the Rebbe's household. Just a few memories of his that very remarkable memories, which I'm sure you'll enjoy on the various, well, not necessarily related to any specific subject. Reb Chaim Baruch um, is a grandson of the Shkaver Rebbe, and he comes from who the Shkaver Rebbe was a grandson of the great Tzaddik Reb Chaim, the Tzanzer Rebbe, and so Reb Chaim Baruch naturally was sent to a yeshiva in Israel, the same where his family lived, of the Tzanzer Chassidim. However, um, one day he was accused of smoking, although he didn't smoke, but he was accused of smoking, and because of that he was expelled. But because his family was so close to the Tzanzer Chassidim, so he got his father got him back in the yeshiva, but he didn't want to go back to yeshiva. He didn't want to go back to yeshiva, and his father looking for a yeshiva for him, and that's how he ended up going to study in Lubavitch. His family is connected to many, many tzaddikim. One of the tzaddikim his family is connected to is a man named Rabbi Aaron Yosef, who wrote a sefer, um, a scholarly work, and just one story about his grandfather, Rabbi Aaron Yosef, Luria. Aaron Yosef felt his end was near, and he went on Shabbos to the table of the Toldos Aaron, the tzaddik of Toldos Aaron, and he said to the assembled, "I need to have a few guys to come with me because my soul's going to leave my body right now, and it's customary to have a group of 10 people when the soul leaves the body. Would anyone want to come with me?" So it caused a little stir, and so they thought he was just kidding around. But word reached their Rebbe, Rav Toldos Aaron, and they said, "Oh, I want to be part of the minyan too. If you want to leave now," he became also very, touched and moved. I'm here for you. He said, "No, you're a Kohen, and a Kohen cannot be present when someone passes away." And so he sent over a minyan of Jews to his home. He lied down on the floor. He said, "Shema Yisrael," and his soul left his body. That's the story. Anyway, so Reb Chaim Baruch, because of his entry into the yeshiva of Tomchet Memim in Lud in Israel, he was very, very attracted and close to the Chabad way of life, which led him to studying the yeshiva in 770 and do many wonderful things. So here are a few of his memories. He said when he came to 770, right away he was assigned to work in the Rebbe's household, and in 770, and he didn't have any money. He had a rich relative which he thought would may provide for him, but his rich relative America didn't really want to help him. And so, anyways, he's working in the Rebbe's home, and one day the Rebbetzin asks him, "How often do you change your clothing?" He said, "Change my clothing." He says very proudly, like, I have good hygiene. This is what he knew of in those days. I change my clothing once a week. So the Rebbetzin responds, "I see you copy my husband in everything. I feel the zaken, even your socks like my husband's socks. My husband changes his clothing once a day." So he says to the Rebbetzin, "But I don't have." He only had two sets of clothing. So the Rebbetzin said, "Okay," and she got him 6 shirts and 12 of everything else, and he was able to change his clothing. Interesting memory he shared also by the Rebbe Seder. The Rebbe, after Mekiddush, the Rebbe would go to wash his hands for the karpas, urchatz. And one day, he and some others wanted to see how the Rebbe washes his hands. While everyone else was making kiddush, everyone will go wash, and the Rebbe would wash in front of a mirror. On one side was a mirror, on the other side you could see. So they wanted to watch. And they saw the Rebbe washed one hand, the Rebbe washed the other hand, and the Rebbe dried his hands. They were surprised. What's going on? As he asked others who worked in the Rebbe's household, and he saw that after the Rebbe dried his hands, the Rebbe washed his hands again. In Jewish law, halacha, it talks about what to do before you wash, and it says before you wash, you have to make sure your hands are clean. So apparently, it's not sufficient just to wash your hands and keep on washing and just wash off the wine and keep on washing. You apparently have to dry your hands before you begin washing again. And even though the Rebbe wasn't reciting a blessing for karpas, Rebbe continued that to wash it. And they asked the others though, why does Rebbe use a cup to wash his hands? So they responded that the Rebbe never, just so you don't drink from a sink, the Rebbe would never wash his hands from from the sink, from the faucet. They would always wash his hands with a cup. Now, obviously, that's something which is custom of the Rebbe, but it does tell us also about the halacha about washing your hands when your hands are dirty. First, wash them and dry them, and then wash for bread. Okay, so um, he shared a few memories about that the previous Rebbe's Rebbetzin shared with him. So one time she was deaf and she couldn't hear Havdalah, and so she asked the Rebbe what she should do for Havdalah because she can't have grape juice and she can't have wine. So Rebbe made with his hands like a spoon and a cup, and she understood tea. I said yes, tea. She said once that her husband, the previous Rebbe, after everyone left, she found him crying, and she said her husband said, "I cannot handle the pain of the Jewish people." Um, Here's an unbelievable story. One more story. L'chaim Baruch. Reb Chaim Mushka said that her father had a request from her and her two sisters. The request was, Torah says, Kol kvudad bas melech b'nima. The glory of the king's daughters are within. And therefore, the previous Rebbe said, I'm not commanding you, but I'm asking you that not to walk in the streets of Lubavitch, where they lived, unnecessarily. I'm not commanding you, but don't go out in the streets unless you need to. This was, of course, a behavior that is um, highest level of modesty that was required from the daughters of the previous Rebbe. But again, he was saying, I'm not commanding, just requesting. One day, the previous Rebbe and his wife were away, and it was a beautiful day. And the Rebbe and her sisters want to go out in the street, but they needed something to wear to go out in the street. And they're looking, and the only thing they could find was their outfits for Yontif, the holiday outfits. So they put on their holiday outfits. She said, Rebbe Chaimushka said, the streets of Lubavitch were always very muddy, but they had sort of a sidewalk. They had these wooden planks, these two wooden planks on the side of the main street, on the muddy area, and they would walk on the side on these wooden planks. That was sort of like a sidewalk. So she said when she and her sisters left the home, the goat that was in their courtyard followed them. Now, obviously, they weren't so comfortable with this guest following them, but they made a joke to each other. Probably our dad has sent a guard to watch us. So they started to walk, and the goat is following them. And they're going and going, and eventually, at one point, the goat jumps. When the goat jumps, they all got scared, and they all jumped off the sidewalk, and they all fell in the mud with their yontif, with their holiday clothing. Rebbe and Chaim Mushka concluded, it seems that my father really didn't want us to go in the streets. That's the story she shared. And the bottom line is, we're coming from the holiday of Pesach, and we're coming from Shabbos Shemini, and we just blessed the month of Iyar. The month of Iyar is a month of good health, a month of healing, and the month of Nisan is a month of miracles. And Chassidus says, as I shared a few weeks ago, there are two ways healing can happen. Either healing can happen first, and then then faith comes afterwards. After God heals you, then you say, "Oh, I have faith in God. I see God healed me." Passover is associated with the miracles of God and with our faith in God, as we eat matzah, which expresses our faith in God. So either the healing can make you have faith, or it could happen the other way around. Because you believe in God, you're healed. The unique quality of the month of Iyar that we're about to enter is, as the Torah says, Iyar stands for the words, Ani Hashem Refecha, I am God who heals you. The difference between the healing of a doctor and the healing of God is that when God heals a person, there's no trace at all of the illness. And even more, as the Torah says, "Le'asem alecha," God's healing is in a preventative way, that there's no illness in the first place. So the better way is where the healing brings the cure. Not that the cure bring, I'm sorry, not that the faith, not that the cure brings the faith, but that the faith brings the cure. The first night of Passover, the Zohar says our faith, the matzah is called the food of faith, and the second night of Passover, the Zohar says the matzah is called the food of healing. That's a better way, where the faith brings the healing. That you're so sure that God's with you, you're so sure that there's nothing to worry about. That itself brings the healing. Hashem should bless all those in refuah shlema, should have a refuah kreva shlema, suras tevis, and on the way there, to have not to wait until the healing happens, but to already feel good before. One more story. The Rizhner Rebbe once was asked for a blessing, and he gave a blessing, and his blessing was, God will help. So the man who got the blessing leaves the Rizhner Rebbe's room, and he meets one of his children, and he says to this boy, I just was by your dad. He says, really? What did my dad say? He says, your dad said God's going to help. So the boy said, I want you to go back to my father and ask my father, until God helps, what should I do? So he goes back. Okay. He goes back to the Rebbe. You said the Eibishter would help, and he said God will help. He said, until God will help, what should I do? So the Rebbe said, paused for a moment, and he said, the Eibishter wird helfen. God will help. Bis der Eibishter wird helfen, wird der Eibishter helfen. And until God helps, God will help. We shouldn't have to wait. We should have to see good news, each of us in our own lives. Teva Nirva Nigla, and all of Am Yisrael, B'kar of Mamish, with Bias Mashiach Zakenu. A gute Woche and a freiliche Woche.